The Paul Leslie Hour, helping people tell their stories. And now, your host, Paul Leslie.
Hey, it's me. Hello and welcome. This episode of the Paul Leslie Hour is debuting January 1st, 2021. This is an interview with author, music critic, jazz historian Will Friedwald. If you want to support the mission of the Paul Leslie Hour and all we hope to accomplish in 2021, which is bringing more content like this directly to you, just go to thepaulleslie.com. Up at the top, click where it says support the show. It only takes a moment. It makes a world of difference. And now, let's get into the interview with Will Friedwald, right here on the Paul Leslie Hour.
Hey, it's Paul?
Yes, it's me.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm good.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome all. Welcome to 2021 and beyond. We have with us a champion of jazz, the great American songs, and the men and women who sing them. Will Friedwald is an author who has written 10 books, including the acclaimed Sinatra, The Song Is You, Stardust Melodies, and most recently, Straighten Up and Fly Right, The Life and Music of Nat King Cole. He also writes about music and popular culture for publications like The Wall Street Journal, Vanity Fair, and Playboy. Will Friedwald has written more than 600 liner notes for CDs. I can assure him and our listeners this is a great pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy New Year. Let's hope 2021 is better.
Always.
We got no place to go but up. Anyhow.
Well spoken. Well, I think most stories are best from the beginning. So tell us a little bit, if we could get a snapshot of what life was like when you were growing up in the household, what would we see and what would we hear?
Oh boy. You know, the funny thing is today, if you were coming into like listening to something or a kind of music or any aspect of culture, with what's out there, I can imagine you would be overwhelmed. But from the other way around, it was very underwhelming. I remember to get like one record, if you were like interested in the same kind of music that I write about, you could only do it one record at a time, sometimes just one song at a time. And now you get everything at once. But yeah, and I remember when I was a kid looking for Lester Young records, and there was almost nothing in print. And I remember there were some albums by there was a jazz organ player by the name of Larry Young. And whenever I go to the Young bin, I would find Larry Young, but it was just hard to find Lester Young. And now you could go to YouTube or Spotify and Apple Music and find hours and hours of Lester Young just waiting for it. But yeah, and I don't know how that affects your appreciation of something. Maybe it's better to get everything at once and then work your way through it. I don't know. But I remember that's my main memory, is trying to piece everything together one record at a time of being younger. And my dad was a big music buff, although my folks were divorced. So I didn't see my dad more than once a week. So, he was, of course, incredibly helpful in me trying to figure out how everything worked. But yeah, that's my main, that's the thing that flashed to mind when you asked that question. It was trying to put together, the story of American music one record at a time. That's my main memory of my youth, my misfit youth, as we say in Brooklyn.
Well, I always like to give credit where credit is due and also point people in the direction of very interesting things. There is a podcast Will Friedwald did, the Malton on Movies podcast, and I thought this was very interesting for a man like yourself who's a jazz lover. You were conceived in New Orleans.
Interesting, you remembered that fact. Yeah, my Leonard is a really old and dear friend, and I'm glad. And for many years, I wanted to do that show with him, but he wouldn't. He never did it remotely up until the start of the pandemic. He always did it in person, not just locally, but in person. So we finally got to do it, and that was a treat. We did it at the start of the pandemic. But yeah, my dad was a big jazz fan, so he wanted to be in New Orleans. He made up some excuse for his parents that he wanted to go to Tulane University for some other reason. And, but he was there just to hear the music. And the amazing thing was, at that time, around the late 50s and early 60s, a lot, that generation of jazz musicians, unlike, say, later ones, they didn't particularly have terrible, drug problems or anything like that. So a lot of them were still alive. They were only in like their 50s and 60s. So a lot of the guys that actually created jazz, a lot of like the very, very, people that had heard Buddy Bolden, people that knew King Oliver and Jelly Roll Morton were still alive and still playing. So, it was kind of a mecca for traditional jazz fans in the early 60s. And my dad was one of the co-founders of Preservation Hall. And if you talk to the managers, owners of Preservation Hall, the Jaffe family, Alan and Sandra, and then they talk about my dad all the time. So, that's a nice acknowledgement. But yeah, my dad was a huge jazz fan, and my mom was from Mobile, Alabama, and they met at Tulane, and they got married. And but by the time I came along, they had moved back up to New York. But yes, as you say, it was true.
And you are in New York at the moment.
Yes, I am. I am in happy, peppy, COVID-free New York. We're pretty sunny morning. Yes.
Do you think New York City is going to return, in your opinion, as a place where people seek out going there? They want to be there. They want to even just see a music performance or some kind of show there.
I don't think it's a question of if. I think it's just a question of when. The pandemic's been devastating for, obviously, music and theater. And but I think it's got, it's going to come for all the same reasons that New York became the center to begin with. It's still the center. It's not like some other place, Phil stepped into the breach, It's interesting. I was just rereading the biography of Julie Stein, and he was talking about how, Chicago had its moment. Julie Stein grew up in Chicago, and he was a band leader in Chicago in the 20s. And, Chicago was really roaring, as was Kansas City, as was New Orleans. But New York became like this magnet that sucked in all the talent from all over the country, and it continues to do so. That's the only thing I think that would have stopped New York is if some other place, had somehow beaten the COVID and attracted everybody and pulled the attention away from New York. But no, that hasn't happened. So, it's going to happen gradually. But yes, I'm sure that over the next 2 or 3 years, New York is going to be right back where it was. Just because, what is it that abhors of nature, abhors a vacuum? That's the place. That's still, it's still the focal point, even though, the sound, the volume is pretty low right now, and then the noise is muffled. But it has to come back just because of the laws of physics, as much as anything. It's just a question of when.
The melody lingers on.
Mm-hmm. You can't hear it, but it's out there.
Yeah. I was reading in the acknowledgement of the Nat King Cole book, which came out this year, and you wrote about flipping a coin, whether you would write about Sinatra or Nat King Cole. And that was interesting to me. But what was it like for you to finally write, as you called it, your dream book? It's a two-sided coin, to coin a phrase. If I had, for one thing, the state of publishing is such a weird place these days. There would have been a much bigger audience, and it would have been much more of a profit enterprise had I written it, 10, 20 years ago. So there's always that, and I can't discount that. But at the same time, I've been gathering, so much information over the last 30 years. I mean, it's always in the back of my mind. I knew I was going to write this book. It was just a question of when. And then in 2017, I said to myself, I says, it's going to be the Nat King Cole Centennial in 2019. And if I don't do it now, then I'll regret it, because this is kind of the perfect moment. So I started it again in 2017. And I had a fantastic research associate, a guy by the name of Jordan Taylor, who, like me, has been gathering info on that for all these years. So between the two of us, we had, tons of new information, and not only about the music, but also about his personal life, also about the biography. So that's one reason it's much more of a biography,
say, than the Frank Sinatra book. Of course, there's been so many, biographies of Sinatra, both good and horrendous. But, with Sinatra, I just deliberately decided to just concentrate almost exclusively on the music and not so much on the personal life. Whereas with Nat, I decided, because there was a lot of new information about his biography, about, him personally, I decided to make it more of a well-rounded biography. But, of course, the focus is primarily about the music. The music is what drives the whole enterprise. I mean, in both cases, we wouldn't be talking about them if it weren't for the music. That's the whole reason we're interested in them to begin with. And yeah, I was, like I say, I had the advantage of, gathering all this stuff and also that I interviewed, over the years, dozens of people who had worked with Nat. So it's almost like I was working steadily on this book for 20 or 30 years before, 2017 when I signed the contract to write it. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, as everybody says in every interview ever.
Well, you mentioned doing these interviews, and there's somebody that I'm hoping you can tell us about. I knew him a little bit. I didn't know him as well as you did, but he's just passed away. A very, very talented man, very kind guy. I'm talking about Freddie Cole.
Oh, Freddie, yeah. Well, boy, that's one of those smack in the face moments. Oh, we could do if you ever want to do a whole show about Freddie, I'd be happy to talk about it. His son, Lionel, is a friend. My relationship with Freddie, first of all, Freddie was a remarkable singer and pianist and an outstanding talent. And he had this really complicated relationship, not with Nat. He had a really direct relationship with Nat. It wasn't complicated at all. But he had a complicated relationship with Nat's legacy in that he was obviously the beneficiary of it, but he always wanted to be something more than just the kid brother of Nat Cole, which he was. And he wanted to be known to have a style and a sound of his own, which he did. But at the same time, that legacy was just so huge. And, and that Freddie once said to me, everybody else is, singing my brother's songs. Why shouldn't I? Which is a great question. And so, but he knew that legacy. He knew that canon of work better than anybody. And so, yeah, once a year, they would talk him into doing a tribute to Nat somewhere, particularly on Christmas, and he would do a big hit like the Christmas song. But most of the time, he would find these most obscure and wonderful songs that his brother did once in 1946, and nobody had ever sung them since. I mean, I Miss You So, which he might have learned from the Cats and the Fiddle. That's where Nat got it. But things like that, and The Best Man, and The Lonely One, and just songs that you do not, that were not the big Nat King Cole hits. And so he would do them, and he would do them wonderfully and do them in his own way. So it's like he was acknowledging, his familial place, but at the same time transcending it. It's like he wanted to be known, for his own accomplishments, and yet at the same time, part of that accomplishment was what he gained from his brother. And so it was that's what I mean by a complex relationship, not with Nat himself and not with his family, but with the music, with Nat's, Songbook. A fantastic singer, fantastic musician, and he was great up until the end. I think I saw him, I sound a little bit callous, but I heard him at least, I'm going to say 5 times a year for 30 years. He's the only guy I know that would play every club. He would play Birdland, he would play Jazz Standard, he would play Dizzy's. So eventually I lost track, but if I must have seen him 150 times at least. And I made a point to see him at every engagement. I don't think I missed one, since 1990. But I think probably the last time would have been Valentine's Day. Yeah, he played Valentine's Day, which is just a few weeks before the pandemic. And I think that was the last time he played. And I feel callous. I feel like I should have, been at least making note of the date so that, when this happened, when I was asked about him after he was gone, I would be able to say definitively, the last time I saw him was X, Y, and Z. But anyhow, Freddie, because he had this complex relationship, I've never seen almost any interview that he ever gave about being Nat's brother where he talked about it, he talked about his brother directly, just because it was such a touchy subject. And why shouldn't it be? Like I say, he did not want to be known just as Nat's kid brother. And I only And I think I can say with confidence I'm the only biographer of Nat that Freddie ever opened up to, and it was gradually. It was not all at once. I didn't ask him a direct question until we had known each other for at least 10 years, until I gained his confidence, and I only did one or two sort of extended interviews over the phone. Freddie never talked that much. I mean, what he was like on stage was what he was like off stage as well. He would never talk for more than a few sentences. He was always just more about communicating with the music. And I did interview him formally a few times over the phone, but most of the time it was at Dizzy's or usually at Birdland. And I would get in one or two questions, something that, was just on my mind about some aspect of Nat's music. And I would ask him about it. And, I would do my Truman Capote impression and I didn't even write it down until I got home, or I would just make a mental note of what Freddie had said. And he gave me all kinds of tidbits of information that I was able to put into the book. So that's one, it's very gratifying that I was able to do that, but it's very sad that Freddie passed away literally about almost the exact week that I had copies of the book in hand. So, he never got to see the book, which is sad. So yeah, it's disappointing, but I'm so glad, but it is gratifying that, he was able to take me into his confidence and, give some of his wisdom about his brother's music, to impart some of that. I'm sure there were lots of things that died with him, but God, what a talent! What a incredibly nice man, incredibly gifted man. You get a sense that the whole family was like that. Nat and all his brothers were like that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is we're talking right after Christmas, and really, if anybody was a true Christian, it was Freddie, and I'm sure Nat was too. Just based on what we know about him. Anyhow, sorry, you really pushed the button there when you talk about Freddie.
Well, don't expect much from me as far as this, but I did a video interview with Freddie at a jazz club, and what I mean by don't expect much from me is I was pretty green. I had not been interviewing people very long. This footage was lost. It has been lost for a long time. And there was a video interview that I did with Freddie at a jazz club in Atlanta that is no longer there, called Dante's Down the Hatch. And I'm working on restoring it and bringing it out. So I hope to bring that out.
Was Freddie at all effusive or verbose? I'm thinking it's unlikely he was, but you never know. I mean,
he was. I mean, it was a brief interview, and he was very friendly. And always friendly. Yeah, and I remember he went over and this was really cool. He just kind of spontaneously started to play the piano. That was cool.
Oh yeah, no, that is not at all surprising. He would much rather be playing the piano than just speaking, or singing. That is, classic Freddie.
Well, what Nat King Cole's song to you is the best testament of his talent? Probably hard to say, but maybe his most underrated song?
To pick one?
Or maybe name a couple.
Oh, God. No, I just spent 600 pages doing this. You can't expect me to answer in one sentence. Oh, my God. Oh, I really could not. And I'm not, I'm not evading the question. Wow. There's so many. No, there's not. There's just zillions. I mean, literally, there's some great tracks from albums that, deep cuts from albums that are just, spectacular. Somehow, there's a song called Warm and Willing that was written by Jimmy McHugh. Nat was super friendly with songwriters. Like Sinatra, he really liked to hang out with songwriters. They were his peeps. And as a way, and he would find songs from things like flop shows, like Jimmy McHugh. Both Jimmy McHugh and Jimmy Van Heusen were really close to that. And McHugh, in the later part of his life, of course, he was a huge, figure in the jazz age, and he wrote "I Can't Give You Anything But Love" and "Exactly Like You." And at the latter part of his career, he was still writing songs. He wasn't with Dorothy Fields anymore. He was in Hollywood, and he was semi-retired, and he was a very social guy. He looked like Alec Guinness, big, tall guy with glasses, and he was really part of the Hollywood social scene, and he was forever judging beauty contests. Whenever anybody had like a Miss, Fairfax County of 1956, it was usually Jimmy McHugh was one of the judges. But he was still occasionally writing songs, and he wrote a show called Strip for Action. He thought this was like, a great idea for a musical show with a lot of female flesh. And it was a show. It was a musical about a burlesque company, and of course it got banned in Boston, and it never made it to New York. But Nat recorded, because Nat was close to McHugh, he recorded some of the songs from it, and one of which was Too Young to Go Steady, which became a hit for him from this show that nobody heard of, never made it to New York. And another one was I Just Found Out About Love, which was not a hit single. It was just a single, in fact. I think it was just, I don't think it was ever on an album until much later. And that became one of the all-time great Nat Cole songs. I mean, I think one was a hit, and one was a song that, like, one of my litmus tests is songs that subsequent singers include in their Nat King Cole tribute albums. And I Just Found Out About Love is a song that Freddie used to do for one, and lots of people. Shirley Horn learned it from that. Lots of other singers learned it from that. And that's a kind of example of his sixth sense at finding these songs, which was partly based on his close connection with the songwriters. A few years later, from another show that I can't even remember the title, McHugh wrote a song called Warm and Willing, which long after both of them died was worked into the review Sugar Babies, with Ann Miller and Mickey Rooney. But Nat did it in 1961. It's one of my favorite Nat records, and it's just a deep cut on an album, and nobody knows it, but it's one of those tracks you hear it, and you just, so much of Nat's music is like that. You hear it once and it's 2.5 minutes, and you immediately play it again, and then you play it again. And sometimes I make the comparison, some of the my favorite music from the 1960s, some of the great jazz musicians of the 60s, John Coltrane does a version of Out of This World by Harold Arlen that lasts for 15 minutes. It's a live thing. And that's not even a long track by Coltrane standards. 15 minutes is nothing. But Warm and Willing, I would play that 5 times. So it had the effect of, I spent as much time with it at any given moment as I did with John Coltrane playing Out of This World, because I had to listen to it 5 times in a row, even though it's less than 3 minutes long. Papa Loves Mambo, which was a hit for Perry Como. Nobody even knows in that version. But then it's just one of those tracks. You hear it, you can't believe what he's doing with his voice. You can't believe the orchestration, and you just have to play it over and over again. And that's one of the things about Nat's music, is you don't only play it, you don't listen to the same album again a month later. You have to play it again right then and there. And the Best of the Trio things are like that too. Anyhow, but I digress.
Well, I have to concur. I smiled when you mentioned the Nat version of Papa Loves Mambo, because it's so cool, and people don't know that one as much, not nearly as much as Perry's.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. He rarely did a cover record. It's hard to, unless if there was a new song from a Broadway musical, he would leap into it, or something like that. But rarely, like when Frank had a hit, well, particularly not another artist on Capitol Records, but usually he found the songs directly just because he knew the songwriters and because he was piped into the movie studios and things like that. But rarely, like, say if Frankie Lane had a hit, Nat wouldn't say to himself, oh, I got to do my own version of that. Maybe I can sell more records than Frankie. He didn't really think like that, So it's rare to find him doing, a song by another that's associated with another singer. And in fact, I'm talking out of the type. I should do a comparison and see when Como recorded his as opposed to Nat. But, like I say, it's rare for Nat to take, almost unheard of that Nat would take a song that was a hit for another singer and try to, sell his own version of it, just what we would call a cover job like that, But yes, but I digress again.
Well, since we're talking about songs, there's a book of yours I'm quite enamored with. It's called Stardust Melodies. It's 12 great American songs, and it really, really takes an interesting look at songs that almost everybody knows. Almost everybody knows. Would you say, Will, that there is a songwriter that you could argue was the greatest this country has ever had?
You can't. It's not like, even in baseball or sports, where people have statistics, and there's the same statistics in the music business don't really add up, because, you can't say this guy sold more records than that guy and that makes him greater. American music is just so diverse that, what made Harold Arlen great, what made Duke Ellington great, Cole Porter was great for a different reason, as Hank Williams was great for a different reason, It's hard to say, but there's so many great songwriters, and the purpose of that book was to talk about how, the diversity of American music and the diversity of interpretations, and it was the idea that the American Songbook is unique. What we call the Great American Songbook is unique because it's the only body of music. The fact that at the in sort of the primary years that the music was being created, the profession of songwriter and the profession of singer and entertainer were two different jobs, and they never were the same. So almost never, even in like sort of outlier cases like Harold Arlen and Hoagy Carmichael and Johnny Mercer, they were the exceptions rather than the rule. And you never, but the idea that the singer and the songwriter were two different people led to this kind of plethora of interpretations, over the years. And when Irving Berlin was writing for, Annie, the example I use is Irving Berlin writing Annie Get Your Gun. He was writing the songs, specifically for Ethel Merman. He knew Merman was, going to play the lead, but he also knew that Bing Crosby was going to sing them on his radio show. And he knew that, Tommy Dorsey was going to play them. In fact, Les Brown had a big hit with I Got the Sun in the Morning with Doris Day singing. And he knew, all the swing bands would play them. He knew Count Basie, was playing Blue Skies, which is a vintage Irving Berlin even then. But he also knew that Guy Lombardo was going to play those songs. And so when you think about it, Guy Lombardo and Count Basie playing the same song, I mean, that's as diverse as you can get right there. It's two very different approaches, even though they're both part of the big band era and they're both part of the Great American Songbook. And, that's, the fact that Willie Nelson could come along and sing Irving Berlin songs in a country style in the 1970s, which is so, and Berlin still being alive in the 70s, it's just a remarkable thing. And this is and I always make this point, and nobody's contested it, this is the only music where that's a key part of what makes it great. The fact that the songs can be done in a zillion different ways. We can't say that about Mozart, and we can't really say that about Bob Dylan. I mean, you could do a version of Don't Think Twice that's slightly different from the way Dylan sang it or the way, say, Johnny Cash sang it. But really, you can't, the other kinds of music just are not set up to do that. And it's like the songs of the Beatles, it's not just their performance, it's not just inextricably linked to their performance, but, most of those songs were written as records. They were composed in the studio, using the studio as part of the compositional process. And therefore, once in a while somebody can do an interesting jazz take on a Beatles song, but they're not set up to do that, whereas the music of Irving Berlin is. It's written the music is a template upon which, you put your interpretation, and it's supposed to be very different from one singer to the next. Both, Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra both do One for My Baby, whereas, Sinatra's is the classic saloon song, ballad, and Tony's is a rollicking up-tempo. He made a point to do it like a rock and roll number, as he said at the time, fast and loud and exciting. Very different. He was deliberately trying to find a way that was as different from Frank's as possible, and they're both great. They're both valid. And, that to me, that's the most essential point about the songbook, is that this is the only music in the history of the universe that we know of where that is the case, where you can take a song and do it any way you like. I make the point that, in the 60s, when the bossa nova was a big thing, Ella Fitzgerald did a Brazilian-style arrangement of Stardust, and she called it the Stardust Bossa Nova. But at the same time, as great as the music of Jobim is, Antonio Carlos Jobim, you can't take Girl from Ipanema and do it as anything other than a bossa nova. It would just be ridiculous. You can't do it. Sometimes in my lectures, I make the point is, can you imagine trying to do the Girl from Ipanema as a polka? tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and then, you know what I'm saying? You'd have to call it the girl from Dusseldorf. It becomes a fundamentally different song when you change the rhythm. Whereas with Stardust, you know, you can do it any way you like. You can make it a bossa nova. I don't think I want to hear the Stardust polka, but, you know, maybe you could. You know, sometimes I wonder why I spend the lonely nights. No. Anyhow, that's a new idea. The Stardust polka. But anyhow, yes. But I digress. Again, I gotta stop saying it. It's just a cue so you know I'm ready for the next question. But yes.
It's a great cue. And I wondered if we could get you to sing. And
no, that's about as much as I'm prepared to do.
We didn't
I
even
need a
have to
string
ask.
orchestra. Get me a string orchestra and I'll show up. I sing in the key of X, but yeah.
Well, you mentioned in there Bob Dylan, and I would be curious to get your take. What did you think about him doing those 3 albums of mostly Frank Sinatra songs?
I like them. I mean, they're okay. I played them when they came out. I can't say I played them a lot since. They're all right. I know some guys were really like offended by them. I think they're just interesting. They're an interesting. They prove my point. Do I want to listen to them again and again? No. The same thing with Brian Wilson's take on George Gershwin. I enjoyed it. It's very different. I am very glad that people don't destroy the Gershwin originals and replace them with the Brian Wilson versions, to put it mildly. But again, I think it's valid, you know, and I heard Brian Wilson. I've never heard Dylan. Did Dylan tour with those songs? I don't even know. That's a good question. I never heard about Dylan doing them in concert. I believe all through the years he was doing those albums, he was continuing to sing his regular, set of his own songs. But if Dylan, actually, I would find it interesting enough that if Dylan were to do a concert of that music, I would try to go to it. Dylan doing those interviews. I think it's interesting, yeah, and valid. But I'm again, nobody. The point is that you don't throw away the originals. You keep the originals so that other people can come along and do their versions, whether those versions are way out of the box like Brian Wilson or Bob Dylan, or whether they're much more traditional like Michael Feinstein. Feinstein is an example of a musician who finds new ways to do songs that are, still much more authentic to, so-called authentic to the tradition. And he's amazing for that. He finds new ways to do the songs that you've heard a trillion times. And, they still, sound wonderful, fresh, and new. The Harry Connick Cole Porter album, which came out about a year ago. It was on Broadway about a year ago. Not radical, not like a Bob Dylan or a Brian Wilson, but yeah, it was a whole other take on most of those songs were really, really imaginative approach to, songs that we have already, known and loved for, 70, 80, 90 years.
On the note of Dylan, he would do anywhere from 1 to like 6 of the American Songbook songs. Like when he was in Savannah, Georgia, he only did 1, but he closed the show with Moon River. So,
that must have been great, because that's kind of like a folk song anyhow. That was written, that was written not for. I mean, even though it was a hit for Andy Williams, it was written unless I'm talking out of my hat, I remember that was specifically written to be sung by Audrey Hepburn. So it was written for a very small range and to have the quality of a folk song. So it's perfectly appropriate for Dylan, even though, of course, the guy that had the hit with it, Andy Williams, had, a super smooth, super professional voice, which might be ironic or not. But yeah, no, Moon River would be a great song for Dylan. I wish I could have heard that. I've only heard Dylan live like 2 or 3 times. And it was years ago. It wasn't any time when he was in that folk period. Songbook period. Dylan, the first song he did, there was this rumor that he was about to do a Sinatra project. And the first song that popped up on YouTube of Dylan doing a Sinatra song was the theme from The Cardinal. And what the hell is the title of it? Not If I Stay or we should look it up. What is the name? You know what I'm talking about?
You're saying before he came out with
right, before theme from The Cardinal, Dylan.
The song is like on the tip of my.
Is it Stay With? I think it is Stay With Me. Did I say Stay With Me? I was right. It was a Sinatra single, and it's this kind of weird, rangy song by Carolyn Lee. Yeah, it is Stay With Me. I actually got that right. And it's got all these religious references in it because it almost sounds like a prayer. So again, it's an atypical kind of American song. So this turned up in a Dylan concert and somebody stuck it on YouTube. And this was like, 5 or 6 years ago before all those albums, just before the first album came out. And it was like the first example of Dylan doing a Sinatra song. And I was like, wow, the way he did it, the way he knew the Sinatra canon well enough to find that song, because that is pretty obscure. It was only on a single, and then it was on one of the pickup albums. I think it was like Sinatra 65 or something. Not at all a well-known Sinatra song. So the fact that he even knew about it shows that he had really done, his homework. That he really looked into this music. He was not taking it lightly. He was really doing a deep dive into it. But yes.
You mentioned a couple of names of people, Michael Feinstein, Harry Connick Jr. Who would you say is doing the best job at keeping this music, the Great American Songbook, alive?
Well, all those guys. I mean, the whole point is the music has always been diverse. So the idea is, there's some people that do the songs very authentically and faithfully, and some people that do the songs a little more outrageously. Every year there's like a great crop of young jazz singers. It's hard to believe. Cecil McLaurin Salvant is now over 30, but I mean, up until the whole point, she was in her 20s. She was like the best 20-something jazz singer that there is, and she's got 2 or 3 Grammys already to prove it. I love Cyril Aimee. I love Cecile Salvant. I love Veronica Swift. I think she's 26 currently, and her second album is about to come out. She's phenomenal. She's the singer who best and most directly extends the legacy of Ella Fitzgerald and Anita O'Day. That kind of singing. There's this amazing 17-year-old jazz singer in New York who's about to release her first album. I did the notes, called Anais Reno, and she's a phenomenon, and she has this amazingly dark and mysterious voice, and you can't believe she's 17 years old, but she's truly someone who's going to take the music into whole new places in the future. But no, I love all those guys. I love Nick King. There's tons, and when you say today, I know you're not specifically asking for people 30 and younger, but no, there's all kinds of great singers today. Jack Jones, who's, I'm going to say 82, has a new album about to come out, and he's a guy that's never slowed down, and he's always been doing something amazing. He always has incredible chops and always has incredible ideas. He hasn't played, nobody's played New York in a while. I'd love for Jack to play, Feinstein's or the Carlisle or whatever, but I'd love to see him in New York in the post-pandemic world. He's a great example of, a veteran singer who's still doing great work. Tony Bennett is still doing great work. And people who are sort of in the middle, like Diana Krall, are doing great work. The music is really thriving. There's so many people who are doing amazing things with it, and it's still, part of everybody's consciousness, When Harry Connick can come along and do an album that, either do a project that's a Broadway show and an album, and I think it's also a TV special, it just shows that the music really hasn't faded. It's still part of everybody's consciousness. It's still, it's still part of the mix. It's still part of the cultural. My throat's I'm going to have a sip of water.
Sure thing. Well, one of the last concerts that I saw before everything started shutting down, it was February 14th. I saw Tony Bennett and on Valentine's Day, and it was just like,
oh, nice.
I keep going back because, you can't see any live shows. I keep going back to that in my mind. Every time I think about it, I smile a little, and there have been a couple of times it's made me, I've thought back on it, and I've kind of gotten misty-eyed.
No.
We all look forward.
Yeah, I saw him in 19. He played Radio City, I think it was May or June of 19 was the most recent time I've seen him in concert. I interviewed him a few times in the last few years and talked to him on the phone a few times. Yeah, he turned 92 in August. I was in touch with him on that day. And yeah, he seems to be great. I'm sure if there's anybody who gets restless and hates to be out of action. It's Tony. I'm sure this is killing him, you know. And the same way it was for Freddie. Freddie hated. I know that more than anything, that's what killed Freddie. The fact that he couldn't get up in front of people and entertain them. You know, that must have really been devastating for him. It's not surprising that he didn't make it. You know, but yes. So that's a good memory.
Yeah, it is.
I remember the last week before the pandemic, I was supposed to speak with Melissa Errico, who's become a friend. She had planned this event for months. We were going to talk about the music of Michel Legrand, who was one of her her mentors and inspirations. And we had a whole Legrand program that was going to be, it was canceled at the very last minute, just when the lockdown started. Oh boy. Anyhow, yes, and I was going to see some stuff on that Saturday. And there was going to be stuff on St. Patrick's Day. Oh, you're hitting me in a very tender place right now. But go on.
We got to pick up the program. We don't want people crying.
We're talking about the future rather than the. Yeah, who knows? Hopefully, it's going to come back gradually. You know, one club at a time. You know, once the vaccine is distributed enough. You know, I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't know. But yeah, New York is definitely going to be at the center of it once again. You know, there's no other place that's equipped to, that's set up to be that, And in fact, here's my wacky radical thought. Already tons of retail spaces all over the universe are closing because of Jeff Bezos, right? Because everybody wants to order shoes online. So why do you need a shoe store when you can just, click a box and get the same shoes you ordered 6 months ago when, you need new shoes. So, a million things are like that. You don't really need retail spaces. And on top of that, during the pandemic, everybody's realizing that it's perfectly acceptable to work from home. So why do these corporations have to spend zillions of dollars for expensive midtown real estate when people would just as soon work at home? So what's going to go into all that space? My prediction is that there's going to be even more in terms of experiential spaces like performance venues. And there's going to be even more performance venues and clubs and theaters, and particularly in Midtown, because that's already where the Nexus is. And that's what that real estate is good for. You don't need a Target on, 42nd Street and 8th Avenue. I mean, you probably do need restaurants to feed people that are going to see, music or a show, but you don't need a Target there. You don't really need Macy's in Herald Square, although of course that's a tradition and I wouldn't have it any other way. But really, that whole area is just ripe to become even more of a theatrical and an entertainment district. It's going to become even more than it was before the pandemic. Here, this is Wilski's prediction. Just because it's the best thing to do with all that space,
Yeah.
Something that Jeff Bezos can't, deliver to you, that Instacart can't deliver to you,
Yeah.
You heard it from here first, folks.
Right. I appreciate you having such an optimistic view. We need this at the beginning of the year.
No, I've been saying that for years, because you see all these like shoe stores and, cigar stores or whatever that are closed, even, especially since the meltdown in '08. And, these empty real estate spaces. So like I say, it's going to be, an experiential space rather than strictly a retail space, But I digress, and I repeat. Trying not to do either. I'm trying not to digress or repeat. I'm doing both.
I'm someone who is a liner note junkie, and you've written more than 600. I've seen your name on a few of them. How did you get into that?
Liner notes?
Yeah.
It's interesting. And different points in I'm just speaking personally. When I did my first book, it just happened that the CD was a brand new thing and people were putting out, classic music on CD and they needed liner notes. So I just happened to come along. I can't claim that it has anything to do with, any particular plan or any particular talent of mine. But yeah, it just happened to be the technological moment. It was in my favor at that point. But the converse is that the technological moment, doesn't always benefit one. In fact, sometimes it's just the opposite. Now, the preponderance of social media, which is overwhelming. For the first, say, 20 years of well, not even 20 years, maybe 15 years of, the internet is a real thing. The internet and the traditional news media outlets existed happily, like the New York Times online, the Journal where I write online, the newspapers. Yeah, they were doing their online versions and they were unaffected by social media. But for the last 5 or 6 years now, Zuckerberg is eating everybody's lunch, and this is the reason why so many newspapers are not doing well. So just because people are turning away from professional writers and professional editors just to anybody posting anything about, this is, I don't want to get too political, but this is an era when, somebody, and again, not being political, but somebody like the soon-to-be former president who, and I'm not casting a judgment, but the fact that, he can amass, he was the first president who got to where he is and was because of social media, because of just a Twitter presence which came out of the fact that he had that reality show. But, he was the president that was made by social media. And that is kind of, a harbinger of what's to come when you just let sort of that public opinion and, Twitter trends and Facebook trends and YouTube trends, when you just let that go without anybody sort of, I don't want to say controlling it, but without anybody sort of being responsible for it. And, this is, he's the Twitter president, or he was the Twitter president. And the social media have put a lot of us out of business. It's just it's a grim fact. And, we're trying to do other things. But writing, if anybody out there wants to write about the arts, I would say, no. Find something else to do. Learn how to write code, because arts writing it's been taken out of the hands of the professionals. And I would say be an artist. There's always going to be a need for artists. There's always going to be a need for singers. There's always going to be a need for musicians and arrangers and songwriters. And yeah, do that. But anybody who, there's not going to be another Will Friedwald, which is possibly a good thing, just because, there's nothing to support it now. You can't do it. You just can't be, you can't be a chronicler, a historian, a critic, just because, like I say, Mark Zuckerberg is eating your lunch. Anyhow, now I'm swinging the other way. 2 minutes ago, I was too optimistic, and now I'm too grim.
Well,
but really, my main thing, and I should get this in, and if anybody's interested, I won't do it without your permission, but I'll give you an email, but, or a URL. But, no, for the last year during the pandemic, I've been doing, a series of shows I call clip joints over the internet. And that's become my, sort of go-to profession, especially since I can't write about live music anymore. There's not enough of it to write about. So that's become like a new thing. And so those of us, like my friend Elisa Gardner, who's one of the top theater critics, she now works for a website she started with some other theater critics where they're covering the theatrical scene on their own dime. And it's a glorious thing. But these are all, critics that lost their gigs at newspapers because of, Facebook and because of Twitter. So yeah, anyhow, but I digress again and not in a less positive way.
Well, to go out on a positive note, what would you say is the greatest thing about being Will Friedwald? Not just limited to your
getting to talk to guys like Paul Leslie.
You're sweet. That's the greatest thing about being Will Friedwald. That's very kind.
The great thing is, it's funny, when I look back at my life, the thing that really stands out is, well, of course, when I was writing about Sinatra, I did get to meet him once. And it was, the whole conversation took place in less time than it does, to describe it. Literally, our whole association was 10 seconds. Somebody just introduced us and that was it. But virtually everybody else, unless they died, young like Billie Holiday, I met everybody. I met Sarah Vaughan once. I never got to meet Ella Fitzgerald. That's true. But I knew Mel Torme really well. He was a good friend. Tony Bennett is a really good friend. Shirley Horn I knew. Joe Williams. I bet Betty Carter once or twice. I can't say I knew her really well. But virtually Carol Sloan. And I knew them to the point where they knew my work and they knew me. Barbara Cook once sent me this lovely note saying that she really liked what I had written about her. And she said that she had never written this to a critic before. Even Mr. Holden, who's a good friend and who's a wonderful writer, he wrote about her all the time. And she actually invited me to her last record session where Lee Musiker was on piano. And, you know, stuff like that. Yeah, those are the moments when I enjoy being Will Friedwald, when I can talk about, you know, having known people like that. Hugh Hefner was a friend. You know, the amazing people I got to meet over the years. Bill Boggs, way high up on that list. I know you know Bill. Mark Murphy was a good friend, you know. Almost every major singer in the music I got to meet one way or another, or you know, become a friend. Jack Jones, you know. Tony Bennett most of all. He's probably the guy I've been closest to because, as you know, we wrote a book together, which was really a pleasure, both a pleasure and a privilege. I had to make a special mention of him, of course. But yes, Freddie Cole, we talked about him. Anyhow, continue, yes.
Lots of great people. I was going to just say that there have been so many people who have been on this show who have been very, very gushing about you. They've said, when are you going to interview Will Friedwald? But Bill Boggs loves you. He just loves you.
Oh, Bill's a really nice man.
Well, on this show, I always like to close the show as kind of an open forum, if you will. So, the interesting thing about the internet is you can reach people around the world. What would you like to say in closing to anybody who's tuned in?
Keep listening. There's so much good stuff out there. You know, I mean, it helps if you can. I mean, I like to think that my books are kind of like a guide to what you should pay attention to. But really, there's just so much stuff out there, and there's, you know, so every time I turn around, I hear a new voice I never heard, a new song I never heard. I was watching on my clip joint, I played a whole bunch of Christmas programs that I hadn't watched in total in a while. There's a 1970 Tom Jones did a Christmas special where the guest was Ella Fitzgerald. And it wasn't all Christmas songs, but, you know, they did some Christmas songs. But it was on Christmas Day, 1970. And it ends with, and it has Ella doing spirituals and Christmas songs, which she never did on any other television show. And it ends with Tom Jones doing a song by Anthony Newley and Leslie Breckus that I had never heard before. So it's like, you know, as much time as I spent with this music, I'm always hearing something new, whether it's something old that I never heard before, or, you know, a new song that's just being written, or a new singer that's just emerging. I'm always hearing new stuff. It's never just rote, you know, it's never just the same stuff. You know, there's always something new to be learned, something new to be surprised by, you know, the more time you spend with it. And that's what I would say as your lesson for 2021.
Well, Sir Will, thank you so much for starting us off, getting the year going with a great, energetic interview. I've enjoyed everything, the side streets, main streets, the digressions, all of it. Thank you.
All right. Well, yes. Keep in touch. Don't be a stranger, as they say.
All right, sir.
All right.
Maybe next time we will be face to face, and everyone will get to see our smiling little faces.
Well, my ending slogan is usually John chapter 8, verse 11, go forth and sin no more. But lately I've been saying, go stay put and sin no more.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you have to update the Gospels once in a while. Okay, yes, we will talk. And Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Ba-ba-doodly beep bop. Ba-dee-da, dee-bum-ba-dee-boo, ra-pa-dee-ka-na-sa-jip, ba-ki-la-ka-na-sa-gil-ba-da-goo-la, dee-dee-dee-ga-manga-ga, ba-dee-dee-ga-ya-hunga, a-ya-ga-sa-ga-ba-ki-da-ga-boo, ee-da-ga-mo-goo, a-ga-da-inga-ronka-dinga-langa-bo, a-ki-ka-ka-no-oh, goodbye.